I think the Prime Minister's column this morning invoked three words: healing, harmony, and hope. And I think that is a good framework to also shape our work going ahead under the chairmanship of Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, the core group, task force leaders, and others. Let me now invite Jose Damuri, Executive Co-Chair of T20 Indonesia, to speak to us and share his thoughts for the day's proceedings and indeed for the year ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Samir. His Excellency Ambassador Abai Takur, His Excellency Ambassador Sujan Chinoy. It's really a good pleasure for me to be here with Indonesian and Indian colleagues from T20. So I would like first to congratulate actually the Indian T20 chairmanship this year and a very successful handover yesterday that we have witnessed. I hope this good start would continue, and then we in Indonesian T20 would very happy to participate and to contribute as well in the process. So allow me to talk a little bit on what we've seen during the last 1 year of our process. Looking back, there are at least three issues that I would like to address in my remarks this mornings. The first one is that we need international cooperations more than ever. I think this year has been a very challenging period for all of us. We entered the year quite confidently, actually, with a lot of optimism. But unfortunately, the war in Ukraine has shattered the hope and bring new challenges to the recovery. We now need to deal with the energy crisis, food insecurity, and also sudden liquidity tightenings that happens in many developed countries and also affect many developing countries as well. And with all the weaknesses, we know that G20 still offer us useful platforms actually to talk and to discuss about the various global agendas, including the long-term issues such as the slow-moving but the devastating climate problems that often have been overlooked. And as well as how to prepare the society to enter the digital transformations. I think those issues have been some of the priority agendas in the Indonesian G20 and have been discussed a lot intensively, and hopefully it would also be discussed in the G20 India next year. Although perhaps from the process of the G20 Indonesia, we could also see some important issues that might be overlooked and was not really discussed intensively, such as, for example, how to come up with a coordinated and synchronized macroeconomic policy, including the tightening monetary policy that is currently underway. We didn't see much on this coordinated, concerted efforts. The second one, we also see the problems about debt restructuring was not really discussed intensively, and G20, in my opinion, was unsuccessfully deals with the debt problems. So those issues perhaps need to be discussed or need to be considered under G20 India. The second point that I would like to highlight is the increasing geopolitical that has exposed the group to a degree of polarizations between major powers in world politics. Even earlier this year, so we in Indonesia were afraid that Indonesia would be written in history as the country where the G20 summit failed to convene. So it was a nice surprise actually to have Indonesia manage to hold a relatively successful G20 summit with a leader declarations as well. But of course, the challenge to navigate the intersections between security and economic issues will likely to continue and will likely to be crucial this year. Our colleagues from India might also face similar challenges to deal with geopolitical pressures. We do not know whether the harmony that we have witnessed in Bali will stay, or whether it would also keep resurfacing and widening the gap in aspiration and expectations between the G20 members and G7 members countries. I believe that India would lead us quite successfully to navigate that geopolitical tensions. My last point is that the role of engagement group, especially the Think 20, would be very crucial, not only as the idea bank and to provide recommendations to G20 on how to deal with the global agenda, but also to bridge the diverse interests, the diverse aspirations, diverse expectations of member countries in G20, and hopefully Think 20 also would provide concrete action, concrete recommendations on how to bridge all those interests. With that, I would like to end my talk, my remark this morning. But before I end it, I would like to convey to Ambassador Sujan Chinoy our product from the Think 20 Indonesia, which is the Think 20 communique, and hopefully we can work together also to come up with a communique from the Think 20 India later on.
Thank you. Thank you, Jose. And now may I request the chair of the T20 Core Group India, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, to deliver his opening remarks for this morning's proceedings.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samir Saran. Good morning to you all. Let me acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Abhay Thakur, Additional Secretary in the G20 Secretariat, and of course the presence alongside me of Mr. Jose Rizal Damuri, the executive co-chair of G20 Indonesia. I acknowledge the presence of all other Indian and Indonesian friends. Yesterday, the Think 20 engagement group witnessed a very smooth transfer, a handover to the Indian side, and I dare say it was a very successful event. And we greatly benefited from the views that were expressed by all our participants. This morning, I was quite taken up with the thoughts expressed by the Prime Minister of India in his editorial piece, which has been published by a number of newspapers. And the first thing that came to mind is that the change that we are looking for today is not just in terms of institutions and structures and systems, but also at the very heart of change should be the change in mindsets. And I think that is what the Prime Minister was trying to convey. The other powerful thought that came through was that humanity must move from this tendency to corner resources to sharing resources. And the third thought that came through was the concept of the oneness of all things. And it's not just oneness of all sentient beings that the Prime Minister was referring to, but the oneness of all matter, sentient beings plus nature. So that's a very powerful concept and implies a bottom-up approach to the change that we seek. Other aspects that we must not forget when we deal with weighty matters to do with climate change and finance and digital economy and economic recovery and macroeconomics is that without peace and security, we cannot have any of this. And therefore, it's very important to keep at the back of our minds the looming, continuing specter or the threat of terrorism, international terrorism, the presence and threat of use of WMD. So these are things that we must also keep in mind. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, of course, is the quintessence of India's motto for the G20, and that's very eloquently captured by the theme One Earth, One Family, One Future. When you look at the G20 logo, it depicts a lotus flower with 7 petals on which symbolically rests the earth, the oceans, and of course the 7 continents. And that, I think, signals a very pro-planet approach on our part, on India's part. And through this holistic, culturally evocative logo, India aspires to transcend, essentially to transcend geographical and other limitations and to embrace the whole world in its endeavor to bring peace, development, and prosperity for all. G20 presidency of India coincides with its willingness to take on greater responsibilities at the global level. And as the world's fastest growing economy, India now has better economic resources, I would say also moral resources, to support this endeavor and to contribute to the delivery of global goods. Ever since the G20 was relaunched as an annual apex-level summit in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial and economic crises, developing countries have chaired it only on 4 occasions. And I think this is the first time that we see, seldom do we see, in fact, that the G20 Troika comprises a full complement of developing countries. And I think we should capitalize on this moment. This will give us a little more traction when we refer to certain themes that affect the Global South. India's leadership is a moment, therefore, for the Global South to consolidate the theme of the Bali Summit, which emphasized recover together and recover stronger. It's also a moment for regional groupings, in my view, to seek greater economic convergence. And for India, I think this is a great opportunity to build economic convergence in South Asia in particular. For no country has truly risen without there being a regional consensus on such a rise. So regional economic integration in South Asia, I think, is one of the key themes that we should be looking at. And further of our greater collaboration with Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, and so on and so forth. So I would say the G20 presidency offers India a platform to share its Weltanschauung, its worldview, with the global community and to articulate a future for humanity based on an alternative and inclusive vision. And today we've seen and acknowledged the fact that multilateral institutions like the United Nations, related institutions are racked by dissent, they are fractured, they are ineffective, and they are quite incapable of meeting the multiple challenges that we face today in terms of economic growth, recovery, climate change, and equitable access to global goods, even technology. So this impasse over structural changes at the apex UN decision-making body and the very glacial pace that defines the agenda of reform of multilateral institutions, in fact, provides a fresh salience to the G20. And I would say that the G20 today is perhaps the only representative, or perhaps the most representative grouping available today with the capacity to do good. I would otherwise have also referred to the East Asia Summit process, which brings in 18 countries, the 10 ASEAN countries, the 6 dialogue partners, plus the United States and the Russian Federation. But I think it is in the context of the G20 that we are able to do much more by way of a connect to the much wider region, for it's not limited to East Asia in any sense of the term. Friends, the world today needs honest brokers and well-wishers with credibility to put an end to war and strife wherever it might take place. And so therefore, as was mentioned earlier, India is capable of giving that healing touch and providing that harmony to the rest of the world. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has stated that differences should be settled through peaceful dialogue. And India's presidency of the G20 is therefore an opportunity to work together to build a broader consensus within the G20 on ending the war in Europe and building trust in the Indo-Pacific. I think both are equally important tracks. Prime Minister Modi's address at the G20 summit in Bali was a precursor to the issues that are likely to shape its presidency. Food security, for instance, is a key challenge that the world is currently grappling with. And India's proposal for observing 2023 as the International Year of Millets, endorsed by the FAO and the UNGA, in fact, is a new milestone, in my view, in providing, shoring up food security for the rest of the world. As one of the world's largest producers of millets, India should form, and this is a suggestion that we would like to place before the Think 20 community, that India should form an alliance of major millets producers for sharing technologies and best practices in agriculture. India should seek to replicate its own experience of having created centers of excellence for production of millets in other parts of the world. So we must examine whether we can actually share that model with others. And of course, needless to say that this must be supported by adequate financing as well. The urgency to resolve the matter of funding for climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and what people refer to as just transition in the next few years is a common thread that runs through the COP27 as well as the G20 deliberations. And therefore, as was also pointed out by Ambassador Abhay Thakur, a balance must be struck between growth and green energy, and this is possible. The challenge of climate change can be met in a time-bound manner only if the world acts in unison, and only if the world does not seek to, or certain parts of the world do not seek to impose their unilateral views on others. As Prime Minister Modi has stated, the achievement of inclusive energy transition requires affordable sources of finance and technological assistance. And may I mention here that Lifestyle for the Environment, that great initiative taken by the Prime Minister of India, it actually balances net zero concept, which focuses on national emissions. It balances that with a net zero concept for the individual. And so I would imagine that if the net zero concept of emissions at the national level, excites people and brings about dissent and disagreement, it's time that we tried the bottom-up approach of a net zero concept that applies to each one of us. And so if all individuals in the global community were to apply a net zero concept to their individual behaviors, then we might actually get faster to the end goal of achieving net zero by whichever year. Friends, the G20 may not be a perfect forum in providing a panacea to all the major global challenges. It is nevertheless a powerful representative forum, a tool with a progressive and very resilient structure. India's presidency should infuse new hope through a values-based leadership, which India is capable of providing in tandem with its G20 partners. It must also reconcile contradictions and enable the global community to create a better world. Lastly, as the Think 20 chair during India's presidency, I and my colleagues in the core group, all eminent people, we will seek to work together with the widest possible constituencies in India and around the world to realize that objective of creating a better world. I wish to thank the T20 team from Indonesia for their constant support and guidance for the task ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Chinoy. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Ambassador Abhay Thakur. This pretty much captures both the task ahead of us. This particular session, you have all outlined an agenda that will require all of us to work towards, and also have challenged us with some very lucid and yet promising in terms of creating debates, promising themes to chase. Personal net zero, global net zero, both of these would force us to think in new ways on responding to the green transitions. And similarly, I think the point Jose built, in fact, emphasized in terms of the external environment, and is it conducive to collective action? And are the ghosts that currently emanate from Europe going to allow us as a globe to proceed towards what is a human imperative on development and collective action? I think lots of food for thought, and we will discuss much of that in the session ahead. Thank you so much, Ambassador Thakur, Ambassador Chinoy, and of course, dear friend Jose.